Hello once again, digital world. Welcome back to yet another episode of Spliced in later to do one of my favorite things to do, which is to review a brand new movie. And happily so, I can say that this is a good review. This is a positive review. This is something that I'm very happy to talk about with you today, which is good. I was worried for a second that I was getting too negative about everything, but good movies do exist for me that I enjoy, so I'm glad we get to talk about them. I hope people have had a chance to see Bullet Train after my glowing review of it last week. If you haven't yet, still time. I believe it is will take longer than a weekend for it to disappear from the cinemas. Our review today, though, might be a bit more difficult. If you are listening to me in Australia, you might have trouble watching it. But maybe you can find some way around it. If you're in America and anywhere else, I'm pretty sure you'll find. But today we are reviewing the new movie Prey, which has dropped on Hulu. If you don't know what Hulu is a streaming service connected to Disney, but not necessarily Disney. It's hard to explain because before Disney Plus started with their Disney Star and allowing more mature content on their streaming, obviously Disney had a very specific brand, a very specific image. So a lot of their content fits into that family-friendly category. But as Disney has become the big empire that it has become and has swallowed up all the other movie production corporations, specifically 20th Century Fox, Disney now has the rights to a lot of mature content, which either means they now own movies that were being worked on before this, so are ready to be distributed in some way or another, but don't fit with Mickey Mouse and his friendly friends, or they have to decide if they're going to revitalize the brands that they do have to make them more family friendly, or how they're going about doing that. So for now, while I think they figure out their road with Disney Plus, Hulu ends up having a lot of 20th Century Studios stuff or assorted things which Disney owns, but Disney doesn't necessarily want to put the big castle in front of. In the olden days, it used to be Buena Vista Home Entertainment. If you have all those old Power Ranger videos you used to watch, you used to have Buena Vista at the start. That basically means this is Disney, but we're not saying it's Disney. Hulu's not available here in Australia, though. So, yeah, that's a bit of a problem. If you're like me, you can find a way around it, because there's some good stuff on Hulu. I just finished watching the third season of The Orville. The Orville, I've already done an episode on here on this show. It's a wonderful show. I highly recommend it. Watch that if you haven't, because it is really good television and very relevant with a lot of the stories that it looks into with what's going on in society and the world as a whole. There's some hard-hitting stuff in there. It's evolved beyond the Seth MacFarlane Star Trek ripoff. It's become its own thing. So beside from that, Hulu is basically releasing these movies that were made when Disney got a hold of Fox. But Prey is a prequel to Predator. The Predator franchise is a very famous franchise, originally starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, but has starred a majority of different actors over the years, with the main concept being a unstoppable killing alien machine from space comes to Earth and violently kills humans for sport. Yes, Mickey Mouse may not be a fan of that, but Predator has made money. It's a successful franchise, maybe not critically so, but certainly financially in its early days. The people behind Prey are very competent in their reputation. The director of Prey is Trachtenberg, who directed 10 Cloverfield Lane. The vibe seemed to be like it was on a small scale, so even if it doesn't make a lot of money, they won't lose a lot of money. So Hulu's the best place for it. So Prey's dropped on there. Prey's wonderful. It is a great film and a good return to form to what the Predator franchise should be. Now, as I say that, I may not be the most qualified to talk about Predator because I've only recently got on the Predator train. In fact, I only watched the Predator movies for the first time last year, properly. I think I had seen bits of the original Predator and bits of Alien versus Predator back in my youth. But I never sat down and watched them all from start to finish. Because, as we've said many times on this show, it went under my whole Predator looks like a scary monster. It must be a horror film. I don't want to watch it. Luckily, now I am a very, very brave 29-year-old, so I can give these movies a chance. And I'm and seeing the difference between something that could have been scary in the 80s but isn't so now, or if it's not necessarily scary, it just has horror elements to it. The Predator franchise, while seeming like a monster horrifying story, is not. And just because it's crossed over with Alien doesn't necessarily mean it's the same type of a movie as an Alien movie. Predator is normally first and foremost an action franchise with action stars. And some of the kills can be gory and there can be a few jump scares here or there. But for the most part, it's just an exciting adrenaline story. At least the original Predator is. And here or there across the franchise. So obviously Predator from the 1980s starring Arnold Schwarzenegger is an absolute classic. It's not my favorite Predator film, but I can absolutely admit that from a critical standpoint, Predator is the best of all the Predator movies. It's such a simple concept, and it was executed so perfectly. Predator stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's leading a group of commandos. They go into the jungle to go on some super secret mission. They're the most badass warriors of all time. They arm wrestle with their muscles, and they swear, and they call each other pussies. They're the most lethal predators in the world. Until suddenly they find themselves being hunted by this unseen creature who, despite how tough they are, is just picking them off one by one. It's a nice, simple movie with some great kills. Arnie obviously will come out on top because it's Arnie, but even Arnie is stretched to the limits fighting this thing. And the great thing about that original Predator movie was it didn't lambast you with origin stories and lore and everything that Predator has become over the years. It was so simple. This thing was hunting them. We had little tidbits here and there. We knew that it was an alien, that it had come to Earth. We knew that it was hunting people for sport. It was like some ritual thing that it was doing. We knew that it was honorable, that it had a set of rules and standards about who it attacked and why and how it killed people. And it was resourceful, but could be hurt. It was not unstoppable. Arnie's favorite quote, "If it bleeds, we can kill it." Very simple. By the end of the movie, you don't know what the Predator is. You don't know its alien species. You don't know its personality, its drive, or anything like that. It's just simple and done. It really should have been it, but obviously very successful. It exploded into a franchise. Now, for the rest of the movies, Predator 2, I think, is better than people give it credit for. It did what most 80s monster movies like Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, all of those horror icons, they all went to New York City. They went and took Manhattan, as it were. Even the Muppets took Manhattan. So they put a Predator in the New York jungle. It became a bit more silly in terms of the distant future where crime is rampant in the city. But the Predator itself was still a menacing killing machine. It still didn't focus too hard on expanding it or giving it lore or anything like that. You learned a bit about the Predator's history or its impact over the years that it's been hunting for so long. But again, it knew that the Predator itself is not a protagonist. It's just a thing. It's an action set piece here and there. Then the less said about the Alien versus Predator movies, the better. Whether they went too far in either direction. The first Alien versus Predator is boring and not at all violent, which you would expect from an Alien versus Predator movie. And even the final confrontation between the Alien versus Predator, which everyone goes to the movie to see, while fine, it's not all that exciting. And then with the sequel, they went too far the opposite direction and made it ultraviolet and disgusting and horrible to watch. And when you did try to watch it, the lighting was so bad you couldn't see what was going on. Anyway, complete disaster. Nearly wiped out the Alien Predator franchises off the face of the earth. Predators came along in 2010. I really like Predators. It flipped the concept of Predator and put a bunch of assholes on an alien planet being hunted by multiple predators, but the concept was still the same. It didn't have the simplicity of the first Predator, but in my opinion, I enjoyed it more because I liked learning about these dickheads and assholes and murderers that ended up on this planet and seeing them either work together or betray each other. It was a good action movie. It was directed by Robert Rodriguez, so that makes sense. And then 2018, The Predator comes out, directed by Shane Black, which is a disaster. I have trouble. I've tried to rewatch it a few times. It starts off okay. The characters in it seem relatively likable, But I mean, I know about the behind the scenes issues and reshooting and completely changing the third act. It's a complete mess. And then all this stuff about predators being attracted to a kid with autism because it'll help with science or something like that. It's a nightmare. And then the ending is like an Independence Day Resurgence type silly ending where they're promising more Predator movies where they go and fight the predators. I'm like, oh, I just don't care. It's a real disaster. So I binged all those movies, and then immediately the next day I learned that, oh, there's a Predator prequel movie coming. This one's just going to be called Prey. It's on a much smaller budget than the other films. It's not going to worry about anything the Predator has set, and it's just going to be dropped on Hulu at some point. And I went, okay, fine. Knowing me, I'm going to watch it because I like to, once I start a franchise, once I get into something, I will go and I'll watch any new thing that comes out for it, even if I'm not particularly keen on it, because I just like to see if things can get better or get worse. But I didn't care that much about it. And then I saw a couple of trailers were dropped here and there, and it seemed okay. The concept looked to be that by prequel, it was prequel. It was set very long ago, and it's a single predator going up against a young Comanche girl, and her Comanche brother and her village and some French settlers or something like that. And it was back in the jungle, and it was just one predator. It seemed in the ballpark of what the original Predator was, but I still kept my guard up until I finally watched it. And Prey's fantastic. It is so simple yet so perfect. It understands completely what it is to be a Predator movie. It strips back all the complicatedness that the Predator franchise turned into and just makes it a simple man versus Predator movie again. Or in this case, woman versus Predator. And I'll get into that because our protagonist in this movie is just wonderful. The plot is very, very simple. It follows a young girl called Naru, played by Amber Midthunder, and her little dog sidekick. She is living with her Comanche tribe. She wants to participate in the hunts. She's adventurous. She wants to go out and hunt with the fellas and all of that. But obviously, the vibe seems to be, no, you have to stay at home with the tribe because this is not the way. This is not what you should do. But she realizes before everybody else that something is in the jungle or the forest or whatever. Something is killing things. There's a predator of sorts out there, bigger than a bear, and it is dangerous, and it needs to be hunted and stopped, or at least they need to figure out what it is. Not a lot of people believe her, so she goes off on her own to figure it out. Obviously, it's a predator. A predator has come to Earth, a very primitive style predator as well. Like, his mask is just a little bone mask. He doesn't have all his gadgets and gizmos. This is a predator who is working his way up the food chain for things he will fight. Like, first he targets a wolf, and then he goes after a bear. He's learning as he goes along which is the more dominant species, and that's the thing he challenges to fight, because the predator is all about taking down the strongest enemy. Eventually, everybody starts to realize what's going on, and that once the predator zones in on humans, it becomes a bloody battle for survival with all sorts of parties thrown in. But the movie never loses sight that our protagonist, Naru, she's the one who is resourceful, she is smart, she adapts to the way the predator acts and the people around her, and eventually, very simply, it just comes down to a one-on-one fight between her and the predator, based on what she has learnt as an individual, because it's a coming-of-age story. She's learnt how to know when to accept help when she needs it, how to work as a team with her brother, when to fight, when to hide, what can be useful against the predator, what is just a death sentence if she tries. And the predator itself as well it's a predator. It doesn't care that much about protagonists or evolving as a character, but the predator becomes more desperate or makes more mistakes, or there's a sense that the predator itself is not an unstoppable killing machine and is being worn down by the amount of people it is fighting, the hits it's taking, and the wiliness of this final opponent he has to go up against. It's so simple, and it's so good. Everything works in favor for this movie. First, it's not too long. It's only an hour and a half. It knows the story it wants to tell, and it gets to the point. It doesn't spend a lot of time showing the predator arriving on Earth and establishing all these different characters and all their motives. From what I heard, a lot of plot got cut out of this movie because it just wasn't necessary. Our protagonist, Naru, played by Amber Midthunder, is just wonderful. She's, from the moment you meet her, she's extremely likable. You get her drives and her motivations. You understand her frustrations in the world that she lives in, that she's not treated with much respect, or no one really believes in her. And she doesn't really believe in herself as well, I think. She wants to be a hunter. She wants to be the warrior that her people need. But she makes mistakes. And you can tell that every mistake she makes, every pitfall she finds herself in, breaks her down psychologically. But then she has to overcome that self-doubt and come through when needed. And seeing her learn and adapt and what she needs to do, allowing her brother to help her when she needs to as well. There's that sense that you like her immediately, and if everybody else dies in this movie, that's fine, but she has to get out the other end, and you want her to defeat the Predator. And as you would expect, it is, things will work out in her favor, but it is extremely satisfying watching her get from point A to point B. The supporting cast around her, I think it's been mentioned as well that the depiction of the Comanche people, the way they interact with each other, their customs, their mannerisms, is extremely respectful, which I think is good too. There was not a lot of stereotypes or anything like that. Aside from the Comanche people, I don't know exactly what they are because I don't really know my history very well. They're definitely French. They're like French invaders or French settlers. They're the classic white man who's come to take the land from the natural inhabitants. They're there for fodder for the Predator to wipe out, essentially. But they're still important to Naru's story in terms of what they learn about the Predator, the weapons that they provide, the settings that make for... I mean, there's one scene where the Predator basically just wipes out their entire group, and it's kind of like watching a video game because of just the creative ways that the Predator comes up with to completely eviscerate these people, which is a lot of fun. The gore is good. It's not over the top. It was less violent than I expected it to be, but when it was violent, it was pretty violent for sure. But it's nothing that's going to scar you for life, seeing anybody's head explode or anything like that. It's pretty... The blood is restrained and it comes out when it needs to be. But there are some great kills. There are some great showdowns, not just involving humans. There's a fight between a predator and a bear, which is very brutal and savage. And the way the final fight between Naru and the Predator unfolds is pretty good. Some would say, I've watched some reviews ago, it's pretty anticlimactic. It's not very exciting. I suppose the difference here is that the Predator that Arnie fought in the original Predator, he was decked out in his grenades and his suicide bomb and all of that. So there's going to be a lot more explosions. This Predator has a knife and a shield, and that's about it. He prefers to go hand-to-hand combat with a lot of people. So it's just a testament to the Predator, the Prey being a prequel, and the time that it is set in. This is not a Predator loaded down with gadgets. He's going to use them all to wipe out his enemies. I don't know if that's a choice. If I knew anything about Predator lore, maybe it would be that the Predators have to limit their technology to the planet that they're visiting and what their level of evolvement is. I don't know. I don't really care because it's just a Predator movie. That's all. It's not the most important thing in the world, lore-wise. The lighting looks great. There's some really great imagery in here, especially of the landscape, both before and after all the blood and guts hits the fan. And the sound design as well is just completely engulfing. The way it wraps you into the scenarios and the settings that you're watching and the fighting and all of that. It's definitely gripping. It's the time that this movie went on just flew by for me because between the music and Amber Midthunder's protagonist and the showdowns with the Predator and that building tension, it knew where it wanted to go and it got there in a very exciting way. And it was engulfing to watch for sure. I was completely mesmerized by the suspense and with the music getting bigger and bigger and really showcasing either the horror of the situation or the resourcefulness of the situation. It was great stuff. There's not that much more I can say about Prey other than that it is a wonderful surprise how good it is. And if I were to recommend the Predator franchise, I could happily say that there's now a good Predator movie besides Predator. That it strips back what all this silly goofiness that the Predator has become. It knows what made that first Predator movie good. A simple man versus Predator in the jungle film. We don't care about Predator lore. We don't care about a whole bunch of different humans and whether some are evil or bad or not. It's just man versus beast. Or in this case, woman versus beast. And I'll say right here that I like Amber Midthunder's Naru as a protagonist way more than Arnie's Dutch in Predator. Because Arnie, in a lot of 80s movies, Arnie is just Arnold Schwarzenegger in a movie. He doesn't become a character. He's just Arnold Schwarzenegger. Naru in this film is a character. It is her coming of age story. It is seeing her overcome the Predator. And the fact that she's just got a bow and arrow and her own wits to take out this thing puts her oodles above Arnold Schwarzenegger and his abilities and what he can do. So, fantastic protagonist. Great stripping back of what makes the Predator franchise so good, and a really solid film. I highly recommend it. It's an 8 out of 10 from me. Please watch it if you can. If you're in Australia, find some way to watch it. I'd tell you how I did it, but I probably shouldn't put that on record. There you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I have really enjoyed giving you these positive reviews the last couple of weeks, and I hope that when I eventually see some more movies, that we can continue this streak going. Otherwise, I don't have anything on the docket coming up, so I believe next week will just be a standard episode. I think we're going to dive back into the past of the MCU again, because I want to talk about Thor: The Dark World, which is, in my opinion, the worst of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films, and that's a hill I will die on. I look forward to talking about that with you next week, so be sure to tune in then. But until then, stay safe, stay kind to one another. I love and appreciate you all. As always, thank you for listening to me. It's so great. It's just, thanks. Thanks for listening. You know, it means a lot that people listen to me, whether it's one person or 10 people or 100 people. It's all good. So thanks again, and I'll catch you next week on Spliced in Later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.